Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Thanks for tuning in to another episode in the season here, our little tutorial about the Room database that is the suggested way to persist data in or information in a database from Google. So, if you've missed any of the series so far, we've basically set up a whole bunch of stuff under the hood as far as our little item entity here, our home fragment, a little bit of our epoxy controller so that when we actually have things in our database, we will be able to display them quite easily. But at the moment, we don't really have a way to add anything to the database. So, my thought for this is that we would end up having maybe like a floating action button down here or something like that, and then navigating away to a new screen that then is basically a form that the user would fill out, and upon hitting submit or save, whatever it is, you kind of create the entity from what they filled in, and then we just go ahead and insert that to the database, back them up to this screen here, the home screen, and then the new item should appear there on screen. So just wanted to show you that there's really not much going on on this screen at the moment, but we do have our item entity here that has an ID. This is just going to be an auto-generated ID. The title, an optional description, a priority, and then created or category ID we'll get into in a little bit as we add more tables. So I'm just going to leave that blank for now, and then created at is something that we're going to add programmatically. So we really just need the title, optional description, and then a priority level in this little form, and then we're able to add the rest in behind the scenes for the user, and then start adding our entities to the database. So I'm going to go ahead and get the new fragment set up, the layout done, and then we will come back and discuss, what we've done so far. So enjoy the time lapse. Okay, so welcome back, everybody. Hopefully you saw what I did there, but we went ahead, updated our fragment home to have a floating action button, which always has the ID fob for whatever reason. For an obvious reason, but it's the only one that I'll go ahead and actually abbreviate as opposed to all the other ones I like to actually write out. Don't know why, it just stuck in my head to do fob, but regardless, it really doesn't matter. We then basically assign an on-click listener to that view, and then we're going to navigate via navgraph with the new action that we made. We updated our navgraph here to support having the new let's see here. There you go. Support having the new screen here, the add item entity fragment, which we've gone ahead and created as well, which has all this boilerplate code in it, and then also has a very simple layout here. So we have a scroll view inside of which it can only have one parent. So we have that parent being, or sorry, one child, and we have that child being the constraint layout to provide, everything that we like to have in the layout. There are a few things that I just want to highlight here. So there is a text input layout, which is essentially or can wrap a text input edit text, and so it'll actually kind of apply this nice little border around certain things. When you click into it, you'll see soon how this UI element handles itself, and then there's also the ability for disclosing error states or even different kinds of icons. So I'll go ahead and pop this little link in the description here, and you can read more about it. But this is how you can kind of have that classic, like, password field and all that kind of stuff, just by setting up some like one, or I guess in this case it would actually be two attributes, but an attribute on the wrapping UI element, and then on the inside UI element, and then basically the system will just it'll just work for you to provide this little X here and icon mode clear text. So there's a whole lot that works out of the box for you, and it has the whole material theming and all that kind of stuff. So it's really a good one to take a look at and know how to use, but it most definitely can be finicky and difficult at first just because there's so many different combinations of attributes. But once you get it working, it works well, and it's great. The other thing that I wanted to call out here is actually the use of the radio buttons, right? I mean, hopefully you know the difference between a radio button and a checkbox, but basically a radio button has this understanding of, it's a part of a group, specifically called a radio group, and then only one of those elements in the group can be selected at once here. So actually, is it enabled? No, I think it's called checked. Yeah, checked. So you can default one of them to be true, I think. Yeah, exactly. So if you set this one to be true and then this one to be true, the system knows, like, oh, this is the one laid out second, so this one's going to override it. But you can essentially only have one of these elements checked, and you can either check those programmatically, or you can check which one is checked. And then here you can also set, let's see which one is checked, and then if we remove that, yeah, so it still has the option. So there's a few different ways to actually check the correct button, whether it's on the radio group or on the actual individual button itself. But point being, we want the user to only be able to select one of these options, low, medium, or high. There's no way that you can have, two priority levels to it at the moment. We only want to support one. And in order to actually get this to go ahead and each button to take up the entire screen, or the entire width of the parent there, is actually something called layout gravity. So I don't think we actually even need the gravity center there, or sorry, layout weight. So layout weight was something we haven't talked about yet on the channel, because the constraint layout more or less did away with it, but it was very popular in the linear layout fashion. And let me see here, is radio group, it extends the linear layout. Yeah, so in linear layout was the primary layout, or a primary layout that you would use, years and years and years ago. You would be able to describe what constraint layouts can do better now, with this notion of layout weight. So the idea is that there's three elements within this parent layout, and so if their weights can actually notify the system of how much room they want to take up. If you see that I remove the layout weights for these other two, you can see this thing is actually told to try to take up as much room as it possibly can, and then these other ones are basically wrap content, so they're just going to be as small as they can, and this one will take up the rest. So if we want them all even size here, laid out in the parent, we can set all of their layout weights to be 1, which means they all take up 1/3 of the available space, and everything works as normal. So that should probably be about it for the layout weight. We don't really have to use it that often, but it's good to know that it exists. and then how to use it, but it definitely has been surpassed and replaced with the invention of and creation of the constraint layout. But in this case here, we had to actually go ahead and manage that. And then we just have a button here at the bottom to kind of just, you know, save what they've put in so far. So if we go ahead and take a look at the app here, we click the little floating action button and we landed ourselves on this new page. And as you click into it here, you can kind of see the little hint, the little description here. It flies up into this little border here, this border outline of the view. So this just comes right out of the box. There's nothing here that you need to do. And then the one thing you can play with here is the style. It is the text input layout outlined box dense, but there are a handful of them between the outline box and the filled box. Yeah, I didn't come up with the names, but they work pretty similar, where they have either the outline or the filled, then the outline or filled dense, and then the outline or filled exposed dropdown, or dense exposed dropdown. So the only difference really, I mean, the dropdown are obviously for dropdown menus, but then the only difference between the regular traditional one, the outline or filled box, and then the dense is that it actually kind of compacts them a little bit. So if I remove the dense, you can see that the view slightly grows. I like the look of the dense a little bit better. I think it just makes it a little cleaner. It doesn't need to be as big as they initially made it, I guess, but you can play with it however you would want. And these basically just work like regular text fields, edit text, so that you can then just intercept the user's input at any time, or listen to when they type into it or something like that here, right? So you can type in something here, you could type something here, you could, you know, click that, and then we can click our save button, which is getting clipped. I hate that more than anything, views being clipped, so it's just going to bug me. It should be a quick fix. Yeah, so now the shadow that is being drawn when the elevation changes is no longer being clipped. If you didn't see it before, you can go back and maybe you'll see it, and if you still don't worry about it. It's just my keen eye, because I know what's going on under the hood. But you can see here there's a little bit of theming going on, right? I mean, there's this little purple border here, there's this purple color that matches this, and then there's kind of the what they call the accent color, or the secondary color that allows for these different UI elements to kind of show which one is being checked and interacted with, and then it has a fancy little animation that kind of just goes with it. So a lot of this stuff here is just completely out of the box, nothing fancy here, but it does kind of look, you know, slightly advanced, so that's good to know. And then our back button doesn't work. Why is that? Taking a look at my other project here just to oh, I know why. It's because we forgot to override this main activity level, so we're just gonna pop this in here, import the one that we need, and then we can go ahead and rerun things. So I've copied and pasted some of this code here that has to do with the nav host fragment, the app.bar config, and the nav controller, and all that kind of stuff, and added in little helper functions here for us to actually use them at the fragment level. If none of that makes sense to you, I would suggest going back to some of the previous content on the channel, because we do cover the navigation components and the library in general in a bit more in depth. So if I can find a single video that sums it up, I can put a card in the top right that you can go ahead and just navigate towards to get caught up on that. But otherwise, it's just, you know, the way that we want to navigate our users around the app. It's the best practices to do that, and so a lot of the code can be copy and pasted, so I just did that there. But now if we click this little back button, we actually have it, and so you can see that the screen is even sorry, there's no back button here, and then there is a back button here when you go away from the high level fragment. So, you know, there's a whole lot of stuff that goes on to kind of connect the UI to the nav graph that we've defined, and doing that properly saves you a good amount of work and provides that professional feel. So if you're not familiar with it, I would most definitely go ahead and check it out. Okay, so we have a form here, a very small form that the user can fill out, and the idea is that we would then create an item entity, insert it into the database when they click save, and then probably bounce them back out or something like that to the home fragment, or maybe clear everything so they can add another one. So if we take a look at our entity add item entity fragment here, we can go ahead and listen to a couple of our, well, first we want to basically listen to our save button set on click listener, and then we are going to try to save item entity to the database, excuse me. So this is just going to be a function here that does some things, right? So in our UI we have a title, an optional description, and then one of these is going to be selected. Fortunately, because we selected one in the XML, they can't unselect one of these, so we don't have to check for the error case where the user doesn't have one of these options selected. If they don't change it, it'll remain at low. Otherwise, we will go ahead and you know, handle whichever one they've selected. But the title is a necessary part to our data model. We actually can't have it. And so here in the UI, it calls out title, and then because the description is optional, we can actually call that out as well, and they can decide to leave this blank, and if so, it's not going to be a problem. But we do need to handle the error case where the user tries to save something that doesn't have a title here, right? So let's say item title is going to be our binding title edit text. Text dot toString trim. Trim is just going to remove any of the spaces, and then we can say if item title is empty, then we're going to short circuit here because there's nothing to save, and we can also save or display this information appropriately, right? So we can say error equals required field, right? So just go ahead and give that a whirl, see how that looks. Okay, so here we are. We're going to go ahead and add something, and then if we try to save, you can see here that it even has this nice little, you know, it makes this whole thing red. It has this little exclamation point, and then here comes your error text and blah blah blah, and so then you can actually go ahead and do something with that. However, in the positive case, we need to, or when they do fill this out, we need to actually remove the error if there is one, right? So we could do that here, and then we'll go ahead and just clean it up in a little bit because I have a better idea for it. But in the case of when we want to clear it, we can just say null, and that will just remove the error case from, that'll kind of remove this whole error state from the element, which is really good. The description is optional again, so we don't need to actually handle it. So if we just say description, or we don't need to validate it, let's say, the description is going to equal this, but on the description edit text, then we can get our priority here. So our priority can be when the binding dot radio group, is it called selected? No, it's called checked. Yeah, okay, so checked radio button ID here. So we're going to get whichever button ID is selected. So we can reference the particular views by their IDs. So if we say radio button low, then that's going to be 1. Radio button medium is going to be 2. And radio button high is going to be 3. Right? And then else, guess we could leave it at 0, but it's not going to make sense. Like, unless we add a group or an item to this group, it's not going to make sense. So we'll just leave it at 0. But we had to actually do that. You can see here the when statement is actually basically throwing an error saying that it must be exhaustive. So because we're basically switching, if you can think of it from Java, on an integer value, we need to provide an exhaustive logic, I guess. So this is basically for these 3 IDs is what happens, and then otherwise for every other case we just go ahead and do 0. So that's great. And then I think that's all we need, right? Because everything else is programmatic. So that's programmatic. We have these 3 programmatic, and we're leaving that blank for now. So absolutely, we can go ahead and insert things to our database. Okay, where are we? So we can say item entity equals item entity, where I'm going to call out these attributes here because it'll make it a little bit more readable. We're going to use the UUID, random UUID. The title is going to be the item title. The description is going to be description. Let's just go ahead and change that to be, I'll follow the same pattern here. Let's see what else we have. Priority equals item priority. Created at is going to be system current time millis, and then the category ID is going to be blank. To do update this later when we have categories in the app. Okay, then we can go ahead and access our shared view model and insert our item. Great, this looks good. I am pretty happy with how that's coming out. So let's go ahead and just make sure that our home fragment, which we are not doing anything with, is actually able to handle this, right? So we have our controller. So let's call this controller equals home epoxy controller. That needs an interface, so we're going to go ahead and define this fragment to be the one that implements this interface, which is called the item entity interface. And then we're going to go ahead and have to override or implement a few of these functions. So to do implement me, I'm not leaving it as this because if this block of code actually runs with this special to do, it will crash the app and then it will provide a small like this as part of the stack trace. So it's convenient, but I don't really want to crash the app in case we click on like the delete icon or the bump priority icon, whatever. So we're just going to go ahead and comment that out, but we will get to that in a little bit. Then we're going to say controller item entity list equals our item entity list as array list. Does that does, yes, of course. And then the last thing that we need to do here is just set our, no, I don't want to build models, I want to set the controller to just be the controller. And actually I added in the, where is it? Loading epoxy model here that we had from our previous season as well. So it's just a very basic epoxy model that doesn't do anything on bind, and the layout is just a progress bar that just spins indefinitely. So just a little feedback to the user. It's just always good to provide loading and empty states, in my opinion. So we're just going to go ahead and add our loading epoxy model here. We're going to give it the ID of loading state and then add to this, right? If we are in our loading state. So if you missed this where we built the epoxy controller, I'll link a card on screen so you can go ahead and see what's going on here and how this works. And then if you are unfamiliar with epoxy in general. I'll try to link another one in the top right that will go ahead and just intro you to this wonderful library. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and rebuild the application at this point and see where we are at. Okay, well, let's see if when we add something, so our first entity, let's put it at high priority, and we are going to save. Boom, that looks good. Cannot access database on main thread since it may potentially lock. All right, well, sorry about that. Looks like even to insert and delete, so any communication with the database, we're going to have to go ahead and wrap in our suspend functions here. So if you've missed any of these or our discussion on suspend functions and Kotlin coroutines, I'm going to go ahead and add them or add a card to the top right for you now so you can get code speed on that. Okay, so now at this point we should be good to go. We've just updated our little implementation here to use the view model scope launch for the coroutine scope. And now we're going to go ahead and try to do the same thing. Emulator's moving pretty slowly here. I apologize about that. Our first entity. Cool. I'm going to assume that worked. Let's see here. And there we have it. Our first entity is coming up here. So there are, there are a few problems here that we have. Mainly the fact that there's really no understanding of once you click save if it actually did save or not. So we can go ahead and kind of update that as well. And then when we return back to this screen here, we don't actually we haven't observed the change that's happened to our database, so we're going to have to go ahead and fix that as well. Also, I just want to clean up this here. I'm thinking the epoxy controller, yeah, so we're not handling it at all here. Okay, so we just went ahead here and handled when our priority is 1, 2, 3, or again, we need it to be exhaustive. We're going to put either the green, orange, or red coloring attribute here. And then, as you can see, it looks like our little icon is showing up properly. So I'm going to go ahead and just very quickly say our second guy and say, woohoo, more information. And let's put this one at medium. Again, we're not handling everything perfectly at the moment, but if we just go ahead and restart the application here, we will actually see that now we have two elements on screen here that are looking pretty good. So so we will continue the creation and kind of polish up some of this stuff in the next episode. So I hope to see you there. Thanks again for tuning in, and don't forget to subscribe if you've made it this far so that you don't miss out on the content that's to come. Thanks, and I'll catch you in the next one.